Hello friends, I'm George, the nice medic gentleman. Welcome back to the channel guys, I hope that all of you are doing well. In today's video, I'm going to try to answer a question that I get asked pretty often, and the question is what are the strongest projecting fragrances, cheap fragrances in my collection. So for today I've prepared a list of a total of 16 fragrances, all of them cheap or relatively cheap, that have really strong projection. Now, not all of them necessarily are beastly when it comes to total longevity, but all 16 are cheap and project really strong. The first 4 scents that I'm going to show you in today's video, all of them will be from the brand of Lattafa. And the first one that I'm going to show is probably the cheapest Lattafa fragrance that's going to be featured in today's video, and it's called Opulent Oud. And this one, again, as I said, a very inexpensive scent that relies heavily on the notes of saffron, rose, amber and agar oud. Especially the rose and agar oud combo is very strong with this fragrance, carries a very Middle Eastern vibes to it. It's somewhat similar to something like Louis Vuitton's Ombre Nomade because of the, the combination of agar oud and rose. It feels like a very agar oud heavy and very sweet, jammy type of rose heavy, scent profile. Very Middle Eastern performance here is absolutely fantastic, both projection and longevity. If you overspray a little bit, this tends to be a room filler type of scent, perfectly unisex, and also lasts for a really long time. So it's pretty much a beast when it comes to both projection and longevity, and probably the best thing out of all is that it's very inexpensive. But keep in mind that you definitely should sample this one first before buying a full bottle, because this can be really challenging. The next one that I'm going to show you comes from the Mahir line of fragrances, and it's called Mahir Black Edition, one of the relatively new Lattafa fragrances to my collection. And this is another very unique scent that relies again heavily on a lot of spices, an agar oud note, there's a leather note in here. You get quite strong smoky vibes out of this fragrance, and you also get a nice amount of ambery sweetness. Again, another pretty challenging scent that is very masculine. In this case, leans very heavily to the masculine side. The total performance that I get out of Mahir Black Edition is not, beastly, although this is still a very strong performing fragrance, but where this really shines is the projection. If you overspray a little bit, again, this is another fragrance that can be a room filler type of scent. You get a really unique bottle and you also get a relatively good price. And the next two Lattafas that I'm going to talk about and show you in this video today are on the opposite end. They don't feel that challenging, they're perfectly unisex, and they're actually quite sweet. The first one is called Ishq Al Shuk Goat. This one is a fragrance that's a part of the Lattafa Pride line, the original Pride line, and this one is heavily inspired by Rosendo's Mathieu No. 5. You get a vanillic based fragrance that has a lot of suede leather note. There's some incense in here as well, some spices, but all around this is probably the main thing here is the mix of the suede leather and the vanilla notes with the nice amount of smokiness. Again, a very unisex scent that's very strong both when it comes to performance and projection. The fragrance needed a little bit of a time to settle down. This needed a bit of maceration in order to get better, but with time this really got strong. The scent profile now is absolutely fantastic, feels really nice, really sweet, and again, performance here is absolutely crazy. It's a beast mode performing fragrance when it comes to longevity, and also again with a little bit of an overspraying, this can be a room filler type of scent, projects really nicely. And the last Lattafa fragrance that I'm going to show you will be the newest flanker to the OG Hamra, and it's called Hamra Hawa. And again, a very unisex, very sweet fragrance that relies heavily on a lot of the sweet notes. You get an amber note, a vanilla note, you get a dates note, you get a praline note. There's some cinnamon spiciness in here, and also a very nice coffee note that's been thrown into the mix, which really makes the whole scent profile a little bit more interesting. Performance here is pretty much beast mode when it comes to longevity, and also this really projects. At least my bottle is really strong when it comes to projection. Now the OG Hamra is also a very strong fragrance, but in my opinion, from my experience, Hawa seems to have improved on the projection side. Longevity is pretty similar between the two fragrances, but when it comes to projection, I think Hamra Hawa is actually quite a bit stronger compared to the original fragrance. The next two scents that I'm going to show you will be from the brand of Maison Alhambra, and the first one is called Baroque Satin Oud, and this one is heavily inspired by Oud Satin Mood from MFK. Carries a very similar scent profile, and again here, like with the opulent oud from Lattafa that I showed you earlier, this one relies heavily on the notes of agar oud, rose and amber. It's a very rose forward fragrance, and those type of scents usually tend to be really good performance, and also tend to be really strong projecting scents as well. Scent wise, pretty close to the original fragrance. The quality here is not superb, especially when it comes to the craftsmanship. I don't know if you can pick up the sprayer, how it looks after about 6 months of usage, but the scent itself you know, is really strong. Now this is one of those cases where the performance, the total longevity is not crazy, but when it comes to projection, this really tends to be a very strong, very loud fragrance, and again, like most Maison Alhambra scents, tend to be quite inexpensive. And my second suggestion when it comes to Maison Alhambra fragrances is called Cassius, and this one is heavily influenced or inspired by Parfums de Marly's Carlisle. Carries a very similar scent profile to the original, actually quite close scent wise, especially on the dry down. The opening is a little bit rough, but this fragrance, from my experience, has always been very good when it comes to performance. And here I'm talking about the total longevity and the projection as well. Total longevity that I get out of this fragrance is 9 to 10 hours, which is almost beast mode performance, you know, in my sort of opinion. But when it comes to projection, this tends to be really strong. I get strong projection about 2 to 3 hours out of this fragrance, and again, scent wise, pretty similar to Carlisle, which I absolutely love the original fragrances, and Cassius is one of my most favorite Maison Alhambra scents. And again, another good thing about Cassius is that it tends to be very inexpensive. My next suggestion comes from the brand of Rasasi, and it's called Shura. A very famous fragrance in the community, a very unique scent that can be quite challenging in my opinion. This is really carries a very unique scent profile. It relies on a very interesting note of tomato leaf that adds some greenness to the opening of this fragrance. You get lots of rose, strong agar oud note in here, some leather, there's some musk. I also pick up an ashy tobacco note in this fragrance. All around, a very interesting, very unique scent that has absolutely fantastic performance. This is a beast when it comes to total longevity, and this is also a beast that when it comes to projection. A very challenging scent, definitely a fragrance that you must try before you actually commit to a full bottle buy. And the best way that I can explain how this smells in my mind is like smelling a very luxurious Middle Eastern bar of soap. Pretty much that's how I can sum this one up. Also, another good thing about this fragrance is that to this day this remains relatively inexpensive. My next suggestion comes from the brand of Zaafaran, and it's called Midnight Oud, and this fragrance is very heavily inspired by interludes, by Amouage's Interlude Men. Very similar to the original fragrance, actually surprisingly similar considering how cheap this one is compared to the original, just cost a fraction of the price. Carries a very similar scent profile that's very spicy, at the same time it's quite green, there's a leather note in here, there's an agar oud note in here. This feels also quite smoky, and you also get a nice amount of sweet warmth from an amber note. Again, very similar to the original fragrance, and performance here is absolutely fantastic. It's a beast when it comes to total longevity, and also can be a beast when it comes to projection, especially if you overspray a little bit. And again, the best thing out of all is that this is super inexpensive, especially compared to the original fragrance. And now let's move on to a couple of scents from the brand of Armaf. The first one is going to be the also famous Club de Nuit Intense Man. In this case here I have a 200 ml bottle of the EDP version of Club de Nuit Intense Man. In my experience, this has been an absolute beast when it comes to performance, total longevity, and when it comes to projection. It's probably the most famous clone of Creed Aventus out there that you can get your hands on. It's probably the best-selling you know, clone fragrance in the history of clone fragrances. That would be my guess. Pretty similar to the original fragrance, especially on the dry down. The opening, of course, feels a little bit different, has a little bit more of an emphasis on the lemon note, although the EDP version that I have here is a little bit better when it comes to the abrasive opening of the EDT, but all around it's a very famous cologne fragrance that has absolutely fantastic performance. This is one of the best performing scents in my collection, both when it comes to total longevity and when it comes to projection. And my next suggestion, although technically not sold under the Armaf name, it's sold under a different name that's called a different brand that's called Oros, is in reality under the same managership from Sterling Perfumes. The brand is called Oros Pure and the fragrance is called Leather Gold. This one is very heavily inspired by Ombre Nomads, by Louis Vuitton's Ombre Nomad. Very similar to the original fragrance. Another fragrance that relies heavily on the rose note and the agar oud notes. There's ambery sweetness in here. There's a very strong leather note as well. Also a nice amount of incense, a hint of raspberry as well. Pretty similar to the original fragrance. Probably the best inspiration of Ombre Nomad that I have in my collection. And just like the original fragrance, this tends to be a real beast when it comes to performance. Total longevity is beast mode. Projection, of course, is also beast mode. The quality here is very high. The only problem with this fragrance is that it can be hard to find sometimes on some markets, and also this is quite expensive. And now I'm going to do a smooth transition into a different brand, this time Fragrance World, or to be more exact, French Avenue Paris, FA Paris. But I'm going to show you a fragrance that is doing pretty much the same thing that the previous one that I showed you from Oros. This one is called The Shadow. It comes from the FA niche line of fragrances, and this again is very heavily inspired by Ombre Nomad. Pretty similar to the original fragrance, pretty similar to Pure Leather Gold that I just showed you from Oros. Pretty similar when it comes to performance, beastly longevity, beastly projection. There's a few minor differences in the scent profile. Pure Leather Gold relies a little bit more on the leather note in its scent profile, whereas the Shadow is actually a little bit more about the mix of the agar oud and the rose. But other than that, very similar, especially in they're pretty much identical to each other and super close to the original fragrance. And my second suggestion from Fragrance World and FA Paris is called Raw Blend Nero, and this one is very similar to the OG Lattafa Hammer. Although in my opinion this has a little bit better quality. It feels sweeter compared to the original fragrance and definitely performs better compared to the OG Hamra. The performance in here is pretty much on par with the Hamra Hawa that I showed you earlier. Very strong fragrance when it comes to the, the projection. Will project super nicely for up to 3 hours, maybe even over 3 hours, and it's an absolute beast when it comes to total longevity as well. Especially on clothes, this fragrance will stay for days. It's an extrait de parfum concentration, and in this case this definitely has it's definitely true in my opinion. The next two scents that I'm going to show you will come from the brand of Afnan, and the first one is called Tobacco Rush, and this is a very interesting, very masculine take on Mercer's Red Tobacco DNA. This feels a rougher, more masculine version of red tobacco. It has a stronger tobacco note and has a very strong and high quality leather note as well. There's some agar oud note in here, along with some sweetness, some ambery and vanillic sweetness as well. But to my nose, this is mainly about the mix. This fragrance is mainly about the mix of tobacco and leather. Super strong fragrance, beastly when it comes to projection, and beastly when it comes to performance, total longevity, and also beastly when it comes to projection. And I absolutely love Tobacco Rush. And my second suggestion from the house of Afnan is called Supremacy Not Only Intense. This one is feels like a mix between Nishane Hashivat and Creed Aventus, leaning to the Hashivat side. Very similar, like a slightly more fruitier take on the Hashivat DNA. Very strong fragrance, beast mode when it comes to performance, total longevity, beast mode when it comes to projection. A super versatile scent, just like with the Club de Nuit Intense Man that I showed you earlier. Works all year round. Is an absolutely great when it comes to how much compliments this is going to bring you. Comes very luxuriously packaged. It's an extrait de parfum concentration, and all around this is a very famous release from Afnan and a super high quality offering from them. And my last two suggestions will be from the brand of Haramain, and the first one is called Azlan Oud Blue Edition, and this one is very heavily inspired by Sauvage Elixir from Dior. Probably the highest quality inspiration of Sauvage Elixir that I have in my collection. It's an inspiration, it's a slight twist, not a direct clone or a copy of the original fragrance. This feels a little bit sweeter, a little bit less spicy take on the original DNA. It's the quality here is absolutely fantastic. Like with most other Al Haramain scents, I'm a huge fan of Al Haramain as a fragrance brand because I think they have really nice quality. You get a super luxurious presentation, a super strong magnetic cap, and beastly performance. Now, before this, in order for this one to reach the beastly status when it comes to performance, it needed a bit of time. I've had this for about 2 months now in my collection, and 2 months later, this is really strong and really long lasting when it comes to total longevity, and also really pushes out really nicely when it comes to projection. And my last suggestion for today's video, and the second Al Haramain fragrance that I'm going to show, is called Al Haramain Amber Oud Tobacco Edition. A very high quality inspiration of Tom Ford's Tobacco Vanille. Very similar to the original fragrance, although in this case this feels a little bit more spicy and feels a little bit like a more sweeter take on the original DNA. It has a stronger cinnamon note compared to the original fragrance. It has a bit more sweetness, but other than that, it has very high quality, and it's very close to a Tobacco Vanille, probably the highest quality inspiration of Tobacco Vanille that I've tried so far. Beastly when it comes to total longevity, very strong when it comes to projection as well, pretty much a beast when it comes to projection as well, and has super high quality like all other members of the Amber Oud line. And in fact, all other members of the Amber Oud line that I've tried also have beastly performance and projection, but this is probably the strongest one out of them also. That's why I'm showing you today this one. And so guys, in today's video I tried to quickly show 16 of the hardest projecting cheap fragrances in my collection. I hope that you found this video interesting. If you did, give it a like, and I also hope that you're going to join me in the next one. And until then, stay safe and bye bye.